Thanks, Manu, Pablo, and Woody, for amazing insights into the future of energy and grid. With that, let's dive into our first panel on grid transformation initiatives at ERCOT, continuing the theme on how ERCOT is staying on task to drive transformative efforts and implement them for real impacts. We will showcase some of the work we have been doing at ERCOT, and we will have Q&A at the end. And as a reminder, you can submit your questions using the app. With that, I will hand it over to David Kezell, a Director of Weatherization and Inspection.
Thank you, Prashant. So some of the grid innovation that occurs comes through proactive planning, as we've just been discussing. Some of it also can occur through events that reveal weaknesses in the status quo. Winter Storm Uri was such an event for us here in Texas and for other parts of the country as well. It resulted in more than 14 million people in the south central United States being issued boil water requirements. It resulted in the largest controlled firm load shed in U.S. history, and it resulted, sadly, in more than 200 deaths. So appropriately, people responded, recognized that this status quo is not adequate, and the Texas legislature was in session. A law got passed, SB 3, in 2021 in June, required the Public Utilities Commission to establish a rule that would require weatherization of generation and transmission resources, and the Railroad Commission to require weatherization of gas infrastructure equipment. So that was the first phase of the PUC rule was passed in October of 2021. It assigned numerous responsibilities to ERCOT, including the responsibility to go out and actually physically inspect facilities to assure that they were complying with the rule. So those inspections commenced on December 2nd of 2021, the same year that Winter Storm Uri occurred. A phase 2 of the rule came out the following year that expanded the scope of the rule. The rule now covers both summer and winter for generation facilities and for transmission facilities. And so summer inspections commenced in June of 2023, and as we've grown with this process of responding to this challenge, we've recognized that there's a lot of data transfer. There's a lot of information that needs to pass back and forth between the regulated parties and the regulators, or those that are assigned by the regulators. And so ERCOT put together a weatherization portal, and we put that in place in May of 2024. This is the page. We've had more than 20,000 interactions on that site. We also have created a couple of websites that are more informational called Summer Ready and Winter Ready, and we've had more than 12,000 external visitors to those readiness pages. So we've been able to capitalize upon technology to help us move forward in weatherizing the grid here in Texas and within ERCOT. One of our requirements, as I said, is to go out and do actual physical inspections. The blue line on the chart there is the transmission facilities, the number that we've accumulated over time. The green line is the resources, and the pink line is the total. So we've done more than 3,300 weatherization inspections since the program started, and we've had a very high level of compliance and collaboration with the market participants. I think everyone felt a responsibility to get this right, and we're appreciative of that. And the results have been encouraging. The next slide shows us the magnitude of the forced outages and derates that have occurred over a number of winter storms among the dispatchable resources, so non-intermittent renewable resources, the dispatchable ones. In Uri, you can see we had more than 30 gigawatts that we lost during a significant portion of that storm. About a year and a half later, close to 2 years later, Elliott came around, and we saw a market improvement after some of these changes had been made. And then we've had additional winter storms since then, which are all significant. Each one is unique in its duration and how cold it gets, what kind of precipitation it brings. So this is not a perfect comparison, but we're very encouraged by the reduction in the forced outage rates with Heather, Enzo, and Kingston that all occurred in 24 and 25. So I guess the innovation, the point that I'd like to make, requires collaboration across the board. And whether it's technological or simply just adjusting the way that we're doing things, it's still innovation, and it still brings greater reliability to the grid.
Cool, thanks.
Turn it over to you, Luke.
Appreciate it, David. Hey everyone, my name is Luke Butler. I'm the manager of resource forecasting and analysis at ERCOT. And today I was going to talk about a new probabilistic method that we're using in the operations horizon to better forecast and predict the capacity availability. When I say operations horizon, that's for the next 7 days at ERCOT. So what I will acknowledge is I know probabilistic methods have been used or they've been prevalent in the planning horizon. If you think about ERCOT's Mora report and Pete Workin's team and what they do there, I know other ISOs have done some probabilistic methods as well for similar situations or for outlooks. But at ERCOT, we're starting to work on an analysis that can do this for us in the operations horizon. So what's the driver of this probabilistic analysis and what's the need? Can you go back one slide? Sorry. So those two left graphs, and I think we're all familiar with this, but they show the overall growth of intermittent renewable resources in ERCOT. So the top graph is wind, and as we know, these past 10 plus years, we've seen an explosion in both wind and solar, starting with wind and then more recently solar. And it's kind of taken for granted, but we know both of these resources, when you start talking about capacity outlooks, they're tied directly to weather forecasts, and therefore inherently have a very big impact of the weather forecast uncertainty just on its own. So when we start building these capacity projections, we have to be aware and cognizant that these capacity projections for wind and solar have a level of uncertainty to them. Next slide, please. So traditionally and historically, when we build these capacity outlook projections for operations, we tend to select something like our best guess, what we think wind will be available at or be producing. Same thing with solar. But when we get into these extreme weather events or just kind of high weather uncertainty periods, one thing that we can do in operation is try to mitigate that risk and select a forecast that maybe is lower than what we think might occur, but we want to prepare for that worst case scenario. The issue with doing that is that it leads to a scenario where maybe our forecasts are underperforming on wind and solar. We have a feeling that we're going to come in higher, but we have to capture that risk. So if we move towards, though, a probabilistic approach instead, what that means is instead of selecting one value that represents some scenario, we can provide a distribution and utilize what we use as a Monte Carlo method to select thousands of iterations, thousands of selections for wind, solar, and load to calculate a distribution of net load hour by hour in the operations horizon. So this slide here kind of outlines what we consider currently in this tool. So like I mentioned, it's the hourly forecast for load, wind, and solar, which are distributions of those forecasts. It's not one value. We consider the availability of generation, so things like outages and its impact. And we run it through a Monte Carlo simulation, and we look at what's the risk. So it's a risk-based approach that our margin, which is really just the available capacity compared to the net load, which is a conventional capacity, is there enough scenarios that lead to a margin less than some threshold, so say 3,000, 6,000 megawatts, that would cause us to, first and foremost, just be aware of that possible outcome, but then potentially take action to help prevent that, to mitigate that risk. Next slide, please. So what's this lead to? So this probabilistic approach then leads to a margin that, rather than being the solid blue line, which is kind of the conventional margin that we'd project, we now have a distribution by hour. So that's shown as kind of the shaded region. So this is all the possible outcomes of our margin calculations. And if there's enough of those calculations that are less than some threshold, like I mentioned, this could lead to an action, or at least some kind of situational awareness for the control room and then for the market as well. Next up. So with that past slide, I'm going to focus in on 1 hour. So this is showing kind of a histogram for a particular hour in our capacity outlook. So this is showing the histogram, so all the possible capacity margins that played out in our simulation. And this leads to the graph on the right. So by choosing, you could pick a risk threshold as some kind of margin that you need to be aware of or concerned about. And enough of your scenarios lead to that situation, then we take the action. So what I would say is right now we're in the development process of running this in real time, analyzing the results, getting comfortable with these risks that are being calculated. So it's currently a situational awareness tool, but as we progress into kind of summer conditions, we hope to keep building upon this tool and make it better and better. With that, I'll hand it over to Matt.
Thanks, Luke. Hi, everybody. My name is Matt Young. I'm supervisor for the market validation team at ERCOT. I'm going to be talking about how my team has been looking into leveraging AI to detect market anomalies. Just some background. There are, in these rare situations, market can have price anomalies due to data, invalid data, incorrect data, whatnot. But a lot of times these anomalies are really hard to detect, and so we tend to come across them in the post-settlement process. And with these AI models, we're looking at hopefully being able to detect anomalies sooner so we can correct them right away before they get there. And so just going over like the way we currently do it, we take all of the input data from our market runs from real time, the DAM, SASM markets. We take the input data and we take the output data from the optimization engines, and we have applications that take that data and basically redo all the calculations, right? We look at making sure that the dispatch and the awards are within limits of resources, that the prices are correct, and we do have some model checks, and we do have very few rule-based anomaly checks, and that's what we're trying to improve here. So these rule-based anomaly checks, they're kind of those rules where, like, hey, if you see a LMP spike 100% and all of a sudden, maybe we should flag that and check it out, right? That creates a lot of false positives, and it's really hard to filter through all that data. We're looking at thousands to millions of data points every day, and hopefully we can use AI to help us filter that stuff out and to actually identify true positives. And so that's what we're doing now. We're using historical data from a lot of different pricing events to develop these AI models to actually look at the input data itself and the output data to build these models, and then applying it to real time so we can identify this stuff quickly. We recently had a pricing event that had a really long impact. It actually, I think it went on for over a year before we found it. And the reason was because it had a very, very small impact on the data. And so it was really hard to detect that. And the only way that we actually noticed it was the kind of the stars aligned where it actually had a large impact, and brought it to our attention, and we were able to fix it. We used that event to develop a model, and using the shadow price as our data point, we were able to accurately predict these anomalies within that pricing event with a 95% accuracy. So we're very excited about that. So the benefits of this are pretty obvious, in my opinion. Our current method is a very reactionary method, and so we're looking at prices and stuff after they're already calculated and published, and this AI is going to allow us to not only validate the data inputs in production, But we can do that in our testing environments too, you know. So we can find these really small bugs that cause these really minor issues in testing before we even go to production. And then in production, we can identify things quickly, efficiently, reduce the amount of the false positives that we have to filter through, and just make the markets more stable. And so, yeah, I'm real excited about it.
Yeah, thanks a lot, David, Luke, and Matt. We'll take some questions now. Folks in the room or those watching online, please feel free to add your questions via Event app. Okay, so we have our first question here. Are renewables held to same weatherization inspection criteria as other generation? Must they winterize?
I'll take that one. Yes, they must. And the PUC rule is actually agnostic towards technologies. It establishes a number of criteria that must be met, and so it's applicable to both IRRs and all technologies that are generating in the state.
Great. So we can go to the next one. Do you see advancements in AI technology to become a significant part of future weatherization or winterization inspections as a whole beyond what physical inspections can do?
I honestly don't know. I don't know if you could get AI capturing data, say, with a drone. So you fly by something and maybe inspect the insulation quality on a certain pipe. And so perhaps it could, and I know there are places where they utilize that type of technology. Whether we would do it from an inspection standpoint for our purposes or whether the market participants would do it directly, I think those are two separate questions. I think the market participants likely could use the AI to support their efforts to be prepared. Whether we would actually utilize it in our in-person inspections is probably another step into the future.
Got it. And I have, so we have more questions here. How long it takes to build AI analytics model tools to pull both internal and external data to perform analysis? And I'm assuming this is for you, Matt.
Well, the model that we worked on recently, we've been working on for a while. The data, the internal data at least, is pretty much at our fingertips. It's really more about once you design the model, which could take a little while, but once you have it, it's there. Now, there is, according to the data scientist on my team, there is a thing called drift, where we have to make sure that we're accounting for that in the model as time progresses. But I think once you develop the model, it's pretty quick.
Yeah, I think to add to that, we are also looking for other AI applications, like getting the data and exactly what data, obviously, is one of the biggest hurdle, because in theory, models are out there. People have built the models for you, but how to get the data and what exactly you need to feed the model is the question to really answer here. We have a next one. With AI advancements to better balance generation and load, will there be a goal to reduce RUCs?
So I can take a stab at that one. What I would say is I think overall, if AI is able to better predict and forecast the overall availability of generation, maybe even forecast the possibility of unplanned or forced outages, things like that, that would better inform the market for the overall generation availability to the system. I think that could then lead to less RUCs potentially. Just overall better forecast metrics would lead to less RUCs. Whether I think that a goal, the question says, would that be the goal? I think that's just an outcome of that.
Got it. We have next one. Are there any characteristics between problems where you have found AI to be good fit versus a problem itself?
I'm not sure I quite understand. So far, we haven't had many problems with AI. It's only been a benefit, so.
Yeah, I think the question is more like, can AI create false reality, I think?
Can they create false positives, I guess?
Yeah.
Yeah, probably. No worse than we already deal with, though, right? That the whole point of it is to reduce the false positives, so we're not, filtering through thousands of flags a day. So, yeah, anything's better than what we're doing right now. So,
Got it. Will probabilistic modeling be extended to CDRs?
So I believe there's a panel this afternoon. I'm not sure if that's going to be discussed, but that would be a better question maybe for Pete Warnken in the afternoon on a sidebar, whoever asked that question.
Got it. And I have a few more. David, I'll go back to you. Weather is a continuous changing process. How prepared do we need to be to weatherize for future events? And would this be a continuous process?
Just to make sure I understood, how prepared...
Do we need to be? Because weather is always a moving target.
Sure. I think the rule established by the Public Utilities Commission did establish fixed levels at which facilities ought to be able to operate, and they are reasonably expected to be able to operate at those conditions. Now, the rule also has some self-adjusting parts to it. For example, it requires you to be able to operate at a certain high temperature or the highest temperature that you've ever successfully operated at before. So if you've operated your facility at 105 degrees in the past, but this summer you were able to operate at 107, your rule going forward is 107. The other thing that it does on the cold side is every 5 years it requires ERCOT to create a historical weather study. And if the wind chill conditions at a certain level, 95th percentile levels, if they go down over time, then the rule will automatically adjust and you have to hit those lower conditions. If they go up, then they just stay where they once were. They can't go back up, but they can only move down. So I would say that, yes, there is stuff built into the state rule that allows it to adjust for a changing climate.
Great. So it looks like we'll take the worst case and continue from there.
I think so.
Got it. So Luke, this next question is for you. So it's amazing to see the approach we are taking to unbundle the information and being realistic about the probabilistic nature of forecasting. However, the decision-making process will require selecting a specific probability threshold that initiates action. How do you think we'll make the decision?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think what I would acknowledge is determining what risk threshold would then initiate action, I think fundamentally ties back to making sure your model and your tool is producing risks that are accurate. So where we are right now is reviewing our tool's performance over historical data and making sure that the risk thresholds that we're producing actually is accurate and leads to margins that we see play out at least at a range that's good enough to then warrant taking action on those percentages. So what I would say is it's a work in progress. We're diligently working through that though right now.
Great. Matt, I have a question for you. So it's great to see the 90% reduction in false positives with AI tool. Do you see further improvement possibilities or more such applications in this space?
Oh, absolutely. I'd love to increase the percentage even more, and that's probably possible. The thing that I'm excited about is just the scope of this, being able to actually do models around all the different inputs that we have, not just shadow prices as we did in the model I talked about, but like we could build models around resource telemetry or a host of other data points. There's really no end to data points at ERCOT that we could do this with, and so yeah, I think the scope of this can get really big, and I have high hopes for it. So,
got it. We have one more. do you see PCAT tool can be integrated into unit commitment?
I think ideally, yes, the results of it, if we indicate it, or if the tool produces a risk that could lead to a scenario where we don't have enough commitments in the future, and, you know, like I mentioned earlier, we're looking out 7 days, so maybe that depends how far into the future that risk is printing. But ideally, if this tool is working as intended, it's highlighting and designating risk on hours that aren't specifically present in our typical Outlook tools. So then maybe that translates to, could this lead to other graphs or other displays that we're publishing externally that the market would also be aware to, and then self-commit based off these risks as well. That's one possible outcome. Another one could be, you know, it's situational awareness, and it's tied to some procedure in the control room that if there's a high enough risk at some horizon level into the future, that we could procure or commit additional resources to mitigate that risk.